Hello, this is the lecture for Unit 9, Outlining an Article. Writing is an extremely complex mental process. Any sentence that you will ever write demands the negotiation of dozens, possibly hundreds, of subtle micro-decisions, and how you manage these micro-decisions will have both minor and profound impacts on the piece of writing that you wind up producing. The most useful writing strategies tend to be procedures for reducing the number of decisions that have to be made on a moment-to-moment basis by spreading out the complexity of the writing process into manageable stages and subunits. The biggest, most complex decision a writer faces is the question of what to say. Hopefully, by this point in the class, you have a general idea of what aspect of your research area is particularly important to you, and you have identified some point of view that you think is worthwhile to express. The smallest, most granular, but not necessarily less complex, decisions a writer faces have to do with the atomic features of language itself. Which word should I use? How should I begin the sentence? Should I put a comma here? Etc. In between those two poles, there is a wide gulf of structural decisions about the overall shape that a piece of writing will take. Writers who jump directly from identifying what they want to say to cranking out particular sentences miss an opportunity to reflect on this structural dimension of writing. They may also discover that their attempts to wordsmith individual sentences are hampered by the fact that they also need to employ mental bandwidth to think about how the individual sentence they are writing connects to the entirety of the whole piece. The less a writer has to think about at any one time, the easier the writing will go. It is also the case that the more clearly a writer knows why they are writing a particular sentence and how it fits into the whole, the more confident and self-assured the writing itself will likely be. For both of these reasons, it is always worthwhile to pause at the edge of plunging into the process of drafting a piece of writing and to think about what the finished product will wind up looking like. How many paragraphs will it have? What will those paragraphs be about? And what information will I need to fill up those paragraphs with content that moves my discussion forward? This is what outlining is all about. Outlines take many forms, but basically an outline is a list of things you intend to say arranged in the order in which you plan to say them. Whereas thinking typically happens in webiform networks of interassociations, writing always takes place one thing at a time. Writing achieves clarity and intelligibility by adopting a very narrow aperture that determines how much information can be conveyed in a single sentence. If too much information tries to squeeze through the aperture in too short a time, the result is gibberish. Writers need to organize what they want to say, no matter how complex the big picture might be, into discrete pieces of information that can be communicated one at a time. Typically, this process does not come naturally. It takes some deliberate thinking and planning, but when it is done well, it comes across seeming inevitable and even spontaneous. The best way to begin outlining a piece of writing is to make a list of specific statements or pieces of information that you want to include in your essay. The list may contain some items that you are very sure about and some items that you are less sure about. As you continue to add items to this list, you will begin to see patterns. Some pieces of information will naturally fit together. Two items might address a common issue, 2 points might present opposing perspectives on a single issue, or 2 issues might be closely related. As you begin to observe these connections, sort your list into different categories based on these commonalities. These categories may wind up evolving into the main points that your essay will address. As you continue to play around with this list, you will also observe that some of your points are more obvious, more general, and more foundational, while other points are more surprising, more specific, and more detailed. The more obvious, general, and foundational points should go to the top of your outline, and move the more surprising, specific, and detailed points to the bottom. You will also notice that some points merge into each other, and that some points are naturally nested in other points. You can now start subordinating some points under the rubric of more important or more inclusive categories. You may also notice that some of your main points lack supporting subpoints, in which case you might consider either reconceptualizing these main points as subpoints or conducting additional research to fill in those missing spaces in your outline. As your main points and subpoints begin to come into focus, you might notice additional holes in your argument that you may want to supplement with additional targeted research. Once you have a general idea of what your main points and subpoints are going to be, you can go even further, identifying specific quotes, statistics, and research conclusions that relate to specific points and subpoints listed in your outline. You may also start to think about how your outline will break down into paragraphs. A main point listed on your outline may be its own paragraph, or it may break down so that the subpoints become the basis for a series of paragraphs. Once you know what your paragraphs are going to be about, you can even start to articulate topic sentences that will help you introduce those paragraphs. As your outline process continues, you may discover that your outline is looking less like a list of bullet points and more like a draft of your final paper, and thus you have used a robust outlining process to bridge the gulf between your big ideas and the individual sentences that will express them.